Welcome to HD Rare Coins, your ultimate source for rare coins, fascinating history, and the thrill of discovery. From legendary pennies to hidden gems, we explore the world of numismatics one amazing coin at a time. The coin was small, coppery, and warm to the touch even after all these years. Its surface had worn smooth in places, yet the date, 1941, and the subtle D mint mark beneath it still held fast, like a whisper from another era. It sat at the bottom of an old war veteran cigar box, tucked beneath faded letters and service medals. No one had touched it in decades. And yet, for the right person, for a collector who knew exactly what to look for, this little Lincoln cent could be worth more than gold. That's how it all began for Clara Jennings. She hadn't meant to start a coin hunt. Her grandfather had passed, leaving behind boxes of dusty belongings no one else wanted. She opened one out of curiosity. Inside were loose coins, old war memorabilia, ration tokens, and, in the middle, a single 1941 D penny sealed inside a cracked, yellowed 2x2 cardboard holder. Someone had scribbled in faded pen, "Double die." At first, Clara thought little of it. She set the box aside, planning to take it to a flea market. But something tugged at her. That little note. Double die. She looked it up online. Hours later, she was on a coin forum, nervously asking strangers how to tell. One collector responded. Then another. Then a dozen. The magnified photo she posted made the hobbyists buzz. There was doubling on Liberty. Extra thickness on the date. The mint mark looked repunched, ever so slightly. This was no ordinary 1941 D. She had no idea she was holding what could be one of the rarest variants ever discovered. To understand what made Clara's penny so special, we have to rewind, not just to 1941, but to a time when the world was cracking under the weight of war. That year, the United States hadn't yet entered World War II. Pearl Harbor was months away. But the country was bracing. Factories were converting. Men were enlisting. The Denver Mint, tasked with producing cents for Western circulation, was running almost around the clock. Over 128 million pennies were struck at the Denver Mint in 1941, more than enough to make it a common coin by most standards. But even in high mintage years, errors could, and did, slip through. Especially when the pressure was on. And when you're dealing with steel dies slamming into blank copper planchets tens of thousands of times a day, sometimes a tiny misalignment, barely visible to the human eye, can create something extraordinary. Enter the world of double dies and repunched mint marks. A double die occurs not during the coin strike, but during the process of hubbing, when the design is pressed into a working die. If that process misaligns and overlaps slightly, every coin struck from that die bears a doubled image. Most people would never notice. But collectors? They live for it. Some will spend their whole lives trying to find just one. That's what made Clara's penny the talk of the community. She sent it to PCGS. Weeks passed. Then came the call, *** 1941 D Lincoln cent double die obverse. RPM, repunched mint mark, D/D South. MS-64 red, ***, only a handful of such coins had ever surfaced. And hers had blazing luster, full wheat stalks, and the kind of untouched surfaces that made even seasoned graders lean forward in awe. Auction houses immediately reached out. It sold for $38,000 at Stack's Bowers, but that sale was just the beginning, because once a rare variety is confirmed, the search begins anew. Collectors all over the country began pouring through their 1941 D pennies. Not just for double dies, but for strike errors, off-center issues, weak reverses, and more. One man in Idaho found a coin with a strong cut break, where a chunk of die had broken off, leaving a raised blob on the rim. That one, graded $55, went for $3,100. Another in Texas found a 10% off-center strike with full visible date and mint mark. PCGS called it MS-62 brown. Value? $1,750. The most elusive, though, were the coins with the RPM, repunched mint mark, errors. In 1941, mint marks were still hand-punched onto dies, making variation possible. Some had clear D over D markings, others showed a shadow D to the south or northeast. These were catnip for specialists. One MS-66 RD example sold for $12,400 just months after Clara's sale. The 1941 D wasn't just gaining momentum for errors. Even high-grade examples without any variety were becoming harder to find. Most cents from that year had been heavily circulated. Even rolls saved in banks showed signs of environmental damage, spots, and toning. That made the few survivors in pristine red condition nearly priceless. A collector in New Jersey, known only by his handle, Lincoln Hunter, had assembled a full 1930s, 1940s Lincoln cent collection in MS-67 red. He was missing just one, the 1941 D. And so, when an MS-67 RD popped up at auction, gleaming like fresh blood copper with no carbon spots, he went all in, final hammer price $49, 500 and just like that, the 1941 D crossed over from solid vintage wheat penny into elite collector status. People began treating even circulated examples with newfound respect. Dealers started pulling them from junk boxes. Unsearched rolls became gold mines. On eBay, even raw coins with RPM markings and strong luster began listing for $600, $1, 200, sight unseen, but even with the spotlight turned full on, the mystery of just how many varieties existed remained unsolved. Because the truth was, in 1941, record-keeping was inconsistent. Dies weren't tracked as carefully as today. And many error coins were simply used, lost, or melted down in later decades. That uncertainty. It drove collectors mad. One old man claimed to have a 1941 D struck on a dime planchet. Another swore he had a doubled reverse, not just obverse. Most of these claims went unverified. But the hope they stirred kept the hunt alive. A quiet arms race began behind the scenes. Private collectors, competing in registry sets, began offering premiums for coins with clean surfaces and strong strikes. They cared less about price and more about rarity and eye appeal. One man, known only as J.K. in auction catalogs, paid $8,900 for a deep ruby-toned MS-65BN, brown, coin, just for the color. Another collected nothing but AU-58S with rainbow toning. By 2026, the coin had developed a cult following. Social media collectors dubbed it the hidden flame, referencing both the color and its slow-burning rise in value. Even mainstream financial blogs started mentioning vintage pennies again, citing the 1941 D as a top sleeper coin. And every time someone found one in an old collection, a new story began, because that's what made the 1941 D so magnetic. That it wasn't rare by mintage. It was rare by fate. A coin that passed through millions of hands, forgotten and unnoticed. A coin minted in a year where the world would soon change forever. A coin that, against all odds, survived intact through war, inflation, recession, and neglect, only to be reborn in a new century, gleaming brighter than ever. And as for Clara, she never stopped hunting. After her grandfather's penny changed her life, she started a YouTube channel called Wheat and Wonder, where she helped others search their collections. Her motto, one penny. One moment. One legend. And that's the truth of it, because sometimes, treasure doesn't shout, sometimes, it jingles quietly in your pocket, waiting for someone to see. The discovery of Clara's coin had a ripple effect far beyond her small town. Word of the $38,000 auction spread into unexpected places. Estate lawyers began requesting appraisals for family hoards, bank vaults were reopened for the first time in decades, and coin dealers began receiving late-night calls from panicked heirs who remembered an old box of pennies in Dad's desk. For years, the 1941 D had sat in the background, overshadowed by its steel cousins from 1943 and the rare double-die cents from 1955. But not anymore. This was its renaissance. 1 month after Clara's coin shocked the market, another surfaced in Montana. This one wasn't quite as flashy, than $58 Australian with moderate doubling on Liberty and a clear RPM tilted westward, but the luster was strong, and the surfaces were clean. It sold for $4,500 in a quiet private deal, brokered between two collectors who had been tracking one another's registry set progress for years. And then the game changed again. In Las Vegas, during the 2026 Spring Collectors Summit, a coin surfaced that silenced the room. The man who brought it in, a quiet 72-year-old named Edwin Black, had kept the coin in a plastic flip for over 50 years. It had belonged to his older brother, a coin-obsessed teenager who died in the Vietnam War. Edwin never had it appraised. He just carried it, year after year, through 2 marriages and 3 homes, always tucked in a copy of Red Book, always remembering his brother's careful voice explaining the difference between mint marks. The coin was a 1941 D. But it wasn't just any 1941 D. Under the lights of the grading booth, its brilliance was undeniable. It wasn't red-brown. It wasn't brown. It was fire.ms68rd, there had never been another. The room fell quiet when PCGS confirmed it. Coin forums buzzed, threads exploded with speculation. The Black Flame, as it was quickly nicknamed, was instantly declared one of the finest known Lincoln cents from the entire wheat era. The coin never hit public auction. It was bought privately for $125,000, and the buyer was rumored to be none other than the registry king himself, the elusive R.L., who already held top ranks for the 1934 to 1958 wheat series and had been hunting the last missing link in his set. But this wasn't just about registry bragging rights anymore. It was about history. The 1941 D had become a symbol of survival, of post-depression endurance, of American grit. Struck just months before Pearl Harbor, these pennies had been carried into war, tucked into the pockets of soldiers, dropped into jukeboxes playing Glenn Miller, passed in diners, movie houses, and train stations. The war hadn't touched America's soil yet, not directly. But by 1942, its shadows were long and dark, stretching into every corner of daily life. Newspapers were no longer just about politics and baseball, they were filled with updates from across the ocean. Every family had someone overseas, or someone who would be. The United States had officially entered World War II just months before, and already, the nation was shifting gears, bracing for sacrifice. Factories that once made refrigerators were now making weapons. Gasoline was rationed. Steel was spoken of in hushed tones, its supply tightly controlled. And in the middle of it all, amidst the chaos of wartime transformation, the Lincoln cent, the humble penny, quietly continued its production at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints. At first glance, the 1942 USA 1-cent penny was nothing unusual. It looked just like the ones before it. The same profile of Abraham Lincoln, stern and timeless. The same "In God We Trust" arcing above his head. Liberty beside him. The date, 1942, etched in clean serif font, and if you were lucky, a little D or S tucked beneath it to show where it was born. But what no one knew, not the mint workers, not the citizens slipping them into vending machines, not even the collectors who'd save them for decades to come, was that some of these ordinary-looking coins would go on to become historic artifacts, each one whispering a different story from a time of war, hope, and sacrifice. It started, as these stories so often do, with a mistake. The Philadelphia Mint, one of the oldest dies, had become slightly misaligned during the hubbing process. The doubling was subtle, barely noticeable on the obverse at first. But under magnification, the trained eye could see it, a thickened date. Ghost-like doubling on Lincoln's profile. Slight shifts in the word liberty. It was a classic double die obverse, and yet no one caught it at the time. Tens of thousands of these cents went into circulation, indistinguishable to most. They paid for newspapers, candies, milk, and bus rides. They passed hands quickly, lost in a blur of war and survival. But a few survived the decades, tucked away in albums, forgotten inside old coffee cans, or trapped beneath floorboards, waiting. The first one to resurface came in 1997, inside a tobacco tin found in rural Alabama. The tin belonged to a man who had served in the army and brought it home after the war. Inside were dozens of wheat pennies, mostly worn and dull. But one gleamed oddly under the light, its field sharp, its details deep. It was graded by NGC as MS66 red double die obverse. It sold privately for $12,000. But that was only the beginning. As news spread, collectors began examining their 1942 cents more closely. And not just for doubling. Because that same year, something else began to shift. The U.S. Mint, responding to wartime material shortages, began experimenting with new metals for coinage. The famed steel cents wouldn't officially debut until 1943, but tests had already begun. And from those tests came a trickle of off-metal strikes, accidental survivors of the Mint's secret experiments. In late 2012, a 1942 penny struck on a silver dime planchet was discovered at a local coin show in Missouri. The coin weighed only 2.5 grams, far lighter than copper, and it rang with a bright, high-pitched tone. The design was mostly visible, but slightly off-center. The edges were incomplete, revealing it had been struck in a collar designed for a smaller coin. It was real, and it was one of a kind. That coin was later graded MS64 by PCGS and auctioned for $94,000. Other off-metal errors began to surface, 1942 cent struck on brass planchets intended for foreign coins. Some were minted on leftover blanks from token production. A few were struck on experimental zinc-coated stock. One came out visibly silvery but bore copper beneath, an accidental layered planchet mistake that looked almost like a reversed sandwich. The market began to heat up. Meanwhile, the standard issues were finding value too. High-grade 1942 cents, particularly in full red, RD, condition, became increasingly rare. Most pennies from that year had been handled heavily, used day in and day out. Even those saved in rolls had developed spots or fingerprints. To find one in MS67 RD was nearly impossible. One such coin appeared in a heritage auction in 2023. Deep red luster. Sharp strike. No carbon spotting. It was a Philadelphia issue, common in mintage but suddenly extraordinary in preservation. IT sold for $5,600. But for some, that wasn't enough. The real prize, they said, was the Denver Mint issue in MS68 red, a coin that no one had officially verified. It existed only in rumors and whispers from the elite corners of registry competition. If it ever surfaced, it would be the highest graded 1942 D Lincoln cent on record. Some claimed it had already been sold in a quiet, behind-the-scenes transaction between two rival collectors. Value? Unconfirmed. But rumors ranged from $60,000 to $85,000. Then came the most controversial discovery of all. In 2025, a 1942 cent surfaced with no mint mark but with unmistakably San Francisco die diagnostics. It shouldn't have existed. Every 1942 S penny had been struck with the S mint mark. The absence of that mark made it either an extraordinarily rare over-polished die, where the mint mark was accidentally removed during cleaning, or a mechanical mishap of unprecedented proportions. PCGS authenticated it as genuine. Collectors called it the Silent S. And when it crossed the block at a West Coast auction, it fetched $118,000. Even the Smithsonian took notice. Their numismatic curator, long disinterested in 1940s wheat cents, issued a statement calling the 1942 series a pivotal moment where American history, industrial urgency, and minting artistry collided. They expanded their Lincoln cent exhibit. And at the heart of it, placed one lone 1942 cent, just a regular, circulated coin, no errors, no doubling, no exotic planchet, because sometimes, it wasn't about the rarity. Sometimes, it was about the moment it represented. That penny had been carried by a nurse in Normandy. Her great-grandson donated it after finding it sewn into the lining of her satchel. It had paid for a chocolate bar on the docks before she boarded a hospital ship. Its value? Immeasurable, and so the 1942 cent had transformed, from a background coin into a beacon. It carried stories of war, of mistake and precision, of legacy and luck. From million-dollar finds to family keepsakes, it became a symbol of a country preparing for its greatest test, and through it all, it kept whispering to collectors across the decades, check your change, because even the smallest coin can carry the weight of history, and the next one worth $150,000 might just be hiding in your pocket. The train station was abandoned, left behind in a dusty Nevada ghost town where wind had replaced voices and rust coated every sign. No one had walked the platforms in nearly 70 years. But beneath a loose wooden floorboard in the stationmaster's office, a man with a metal detector made a discovery that would ignite a new chapter in the legend of the 1942 penny. A tin roll canister, the kind used by banks in the 1940s, was buried in the dirt, wrapped in oiled cloth. It rattled softly when he lifted it. Inside, 50 1942 D Lincoln cents. Uncirculated. Untouched. Unseen by human eyes for over 3/4 of a century, when the first coin was pulled out, it glowed with fiery copper brilliance. Still full red. Still perfect. The reverse wheat lines stood tall like stalks just harvested. Lincoln's profile was so sharp, his jawline could cast a shadow. There were no fingerprints. No carbon spots. Just the shimmer of 1942, preserved like a time capsule. The entire roll was submitted to PCGS. Out of the 50, 3 graded MS67 RD.1 graded MS68 RD. It was the coin everyone had whispered about. The ghost specimen. The unicorn. The registry kings were watching. Quietly. All of them. It was placed for private sale through a broker in Zurich. The listing was anonymous. So were the bidders. But by the time the dust settled, the highest offer came in the form of 3 payments, one wire transfer from Hong Kong, one from Florida, and one from an account in the Cayman Islands. Final price, $186,000. The broker who handled the transaction said nothing, except that the buyer wished to keep the coin sealed in a climate-controlled titanium case and store it in a private vault. It wouldn't be displayed. It wouldn't be loaned. It would simply be owned, and that's how wars are won in the world of elite numismatics, not by shouting, but by vanishing, quietly. With the prize in hand. As news of the discovery spread, collectors and historians scrambled to find the origin of the ghost roll. Theories swirled. Some believed it had been sent as part of a payroll shipment during the early war years and never claimed. Others suspected the stationmaster had tucked it away intentionally, knowing coins would become scarce. Wartime hoarding wasn't uncommon. But to have hoarded a roll so clean, so perfectly preserved, it spoke of intent. A local historian named Bill Gaines dug up shipping logs from 1942. According to one entry, the U.S. Mint had authorized emergency deliveries of new coinage to isolated Nevada mining towns that were operating on skeleton crews. One such town, Bitter Hollow, received a single shipment in April 1942. The record showed 50 rolls of mixed coinage, including 10 rolls of 1942 cents. This 10 could have been part of that shipment. Or it could have been something else entirely, a private stash from a Mint employee, redirected and hidden for reasons no one would ever know. Meanwhile, the error coin craze exploded. Collectors started submitting 1942 cents by the thousands, hoping to find something, anything, out of the ordinary.